Hello everyone, today I will be showing you how I created this lovely little raindrop piece using a reference photo that I took in my car actually. It was a lot of fun to create and I hope you find this video helpful and you learn a little bit more about blending with acrylic paints and how you can create raindrops very easily. I am first starting by getting a very kind of loose watery gray on my brush, and what I'm first going to do is basically wash the canvas with this color just to kind of give me a layout of the tones I want in my piece. I'm kind of going for a little bit of a gloomy vibe, so I went with this gray here, but the key is to make sure it's very watered down. I'm never too stickler on which brushes you use for creating your landscapes, but I do tend to lean towards flat brushes that have square shapes for just the main blocking colors, and then for the details later on you will see me use some more pointed round brushes, but they're never super tiny unless I get to the very details. So I'm going to stick with the biggest brushes for a majority of this piece while I just block in the main shapes. You'll see in this wash, I am also attempting to kind of create some very blended colors. So my goal in this piece was to create a blended look because we're focused on the window and the raindrops and the background is all blurry because our camera makes it that way because of the aperture. So now I'm going in with a very dark color, still having a watery feel to it, so it blends with the water that is already on the canvas, and it'll create this nice gradient. I have never personally used oil paints, but I've heard that they are a lot easier to blend. So I gave myself the challenge of learning how to blend acrylic paints, and I think starting black and white like this is really helpful because you're not super worried about, oh, the colors look messed up, oh, they're muddy. It's just simply black and white, and those colors blend very easily on a canvas. You can clearly tell the shades and the values, so I think black and white paintings are always a great place to start if you're trying to understand blending a little bit more with acrylics versus oils. Over the course of this painting, you'll notice that I am bringing the darker colors on the in and kind of blending them out, and I don't actually add white to the painting for a long time because I'm trying to use the natural whiteness of the canvas because it's truly the whitest that it'll be. Like the white paint that I put on will still taint it a little bit. So learning to kind of work with your canvas and what's already there in our little gray wash will also be super helpful in the blending process. This painting did take me a total of 3 hours, so I am going to slightly speed it up in some spots, but you'll still get the general idea and you can always pause and stop if you would like to work on your own. But you'll see me here just continuing to do those brush strokes, blending back and forth, working with the whiteness of the canvas and slowly building up some lighter grays near the edges. So I'm now going in with a lot thicker layer of paint that doesn't have nearly as much water in it to start defining these strong colors that are in the corner of our reference photo. So now I have switched brushes to a more rounded edge brush. Still kind of medium, and I am using very watered down gray paint to outline the mirror of our car. So you'll see when I zoom in here that The natural water that is on the canvas already from our wash is really helping me blend this. It's kind of like an ink, like when you put ink on a paper, it expands outward, and that is exactly what our paint is doing here. So it's kind of working with us to help create this blurry gradient look. I typically like to use the grid method if I'm going for an extremely photorealistic image with a little bit more control over perspective. But for this piece, I wanted to kind of wing it a little bit. So I am just basically looking at my reference photo at the same time that I'm outlining this mirror. And I have developed a pretty decent idea of the size and shape of things over the course of my experience painting and drawing, using both the grid method and just my own brain and comparing the sizes of the two things. What I'm kind of doing here is almost like a neon effect. If you've seen a neon sign or any of the artists today that create kind of the neon spray paint art, for example, what they'll do is they'll put a bright, vibrant color of whatever they want their neon to look like. So, for example, they'll do an orange, and then on top of that, they'll do a light orange, and then on the very top of that, they'll do a thin strip of white, so it looks like this whole thing is glowing. And that is basically what I'm doing, but in reverse. So I'm putting the lightest colors down, and then a little layer of dark, and then the darkest, thinnest line on top. And this helps also make things look a lot blurry, more blurry than they would be if you just did a straight line or tried to blend the colors on the canvas together. Transitional shades of colors are super key when you're first creating photorealistic landscape art and trying to learn how to blend things together. So it's always super helpful to blend the colors off of the painting. So you'll see constantly during my process that I am blending before I put them on my actual drawing, so I kind of know the different values and what to expect before I just slap it on there and I realize, oh no, it's too dark, or oh no, it's too light. I make sure that I know the color that I'm putting on beforehand, and I kind of adapt and grow these colors out from each other using the palette. So in my reference photo, there is almost a slight blue tint from the cloudy sky that is still existing in my photo. It's not just completely black and white. So I wanted to add a little bit of that here, but you'll see later on that I cover most of it up. But it does help me get the underlying tones of the blues. And I was also experimenting. Painting is basically experimenting with your canvas and your paints to hopefully end up with a desired image that you like. So this was a little bit of experimenting, and it's not super serious if you don't if you want this or don't want to put the blue for this step in your mirror. By this time in the painting process, most of that first layer wash that we did that was super watery is all dried up. So I'm actually going in with a dry brush and starting to do my second method of blending, which is dry brushing. Also, at this point, I was starting to regret my decisions for picking such a challenging image because all artists go through their stages in their paintings. Well, most artists, I can't say all, but they go through a stage where they want to give up or it doesn't look like it's just part of the process. It's just getting through those ugly stages and knowing that deep down, with more layers, there will be an amazing painting. So I'd always stay positive. I do some paint nights with my friends sometimes, and they're always like, yours is so different than mine and all this stuff. I'm like, it's your painting. You don't have to compare it to anyone else. It's your work of art. At the end of the day, it's honestly comes down to practice and experimenting. I am all personally self-taught besides some classes that I took in high school, but I've learned a lot. And every painting is a learning experience. Every experience is new. It's all different. Sometimes I love my paintings, sometimes I'm frustrated with them and maybe we'll end up repainting over them later, but I just enjoy it so much that at the end of the day, whatever it turned out, it was just a relaxing process that I enjoyed. So going back to a little bit of the tutorial, I am now starting to add the shading of my mirror, and I want to still show that it is attached to a car, so I try to outline this with the darkest blacks. And I'm also outlining the rim of my mirror to kind of show that this mirror is sitting kind of in the hood, I guess, of the mirror. I'm not a car expert. Sometimes it's kind of hard to plan out your paintings ahead of time. So while I'm doing this whole painting, I'm thinking the background does need to be blurry because the camera is actually focusing on the raindrops. Like that is what is in sharp and that is what is in focus. So a lot about painting these photorealistic paintings is thinking ahead and thinking about your last steps before you even start them and how adjusting your painting now will help you in the end make things look a lot more realistic. And here I am recording in 4 times the speed, but these paintings do take a long time, and a lot of this was just blending, going back and forth between black, dark gray, and slowly starting to build up the wider layers to kind of make things very seamless and gradienty and foggy. My inspiration for this piece comes from my lack of experience with rain. Like I grew up in a desert my whole life and I long for rain so badly, and being able to take photos in my car just in the rain, it just makes me so happy because I don't know, I think there's something so beautiful about it. Just like looking at the little tiny raindrops and seeing how the world is reflected. If you've ever seen raindrops, when you look at them really on a small scale, you notice that the whole landscape that is behind the drop is all like flipped upside down, and I just think the little details are super cool to try to capture in paintings like this. I first learned about this dry brushing technique that I'm doing in the upper right corner by creating very foggy mountains, and I learned that when you just get a tiny fraction on your almost completely dry paintbrush and just go in little tiny circles over and over again, it almost gives like an airbrush effect, which is extremely nice. I've actually tried airbrush painting. It's very convenient, but sometimes the fumes are toxic. The process is a little bit harder. There's a lot more maintenance involved, but getting that airbrushed kind of gradient look is actually possible in acrylic paints. You just have to go through layers upon layers and use just tiny amounts of paint and kind of build them up on each other. It's not a super fast process. It's not as easy as an airbrush or oil paints, but it definitely is possible. So halfway through this process, I actually switched from filming with my phone, which you've seen in the clips before, to filming with my camera. I'm currently in a weird situation where I'm still getting used to filming on a computer. I just upgraded my computer, which is awesome, but I'm also trying to get a lot higher quality of videos than my phone can do, even though it's hard to kind of prop my DSLR up on a tripod. I think in the end it'll be a lot better, so I apologize for the difference in films here. Here we have more dry brushing going on, and I'm really trying to get almost that bokeh look. If you've ever seen where trees kind of create circles when taken in photographs, a little bit of that is happening here. Like the camera is just kind of outlining these tree shapes and dark shadows and creating a really nice outline for me to follow with my paints. I also wanted to mention that it truly does not matter what brand of acrylic paint you're using for this. I actually use a combination of a ton of different brands. I believe that black I'm using is the Acrylic Basics brand, but I mean, I have used the cheapest ones from Walmart and still been able to get a similar effect. So if you're worried about, oh, the startup costs, oh, I don't have the right paint, that's not why it's blending, I assure you that you can blend with almost any brand of paint. It's just a little bit of practice. Now I'm heading in with some more blending colors and just repeating this process over and over and over until I get a look that I am satisfied with. And if you're satisfied by now and you think this is blurry enough for you to continue with your water drops, by all means definitely do it. You'll see me later add some kind of reflections into the mirror to help it look more like a mirror instead of almost like this window that's just a different thing in the background. Now I'm going in with my wash on the top of our little tiny landscape here. And you can see how much this brings out the mirror and brings that into focus and really kind of brings it a little bit more together instead of being so like whitewashed out on the top. I am hopefully planning on doing some more raindrop paintings because they're just so relaxing and it just brings me back to the little kid days where I watched the raindrops race each other and just make my own little drawings in the window by like fogging up the glass, and using your finger to draw. I think that kind of brings out my little kid aspect in here, even though I'm sadly in college and like all grown up. So these paintings take me back and they really make me happy. So now I'm using a blending technique where I am taking the lighter color and bringing it into the darker color, and then I will go back and take the darker color and bring it towards the white. And by doing this process a few times, you get a really nice gradient. So now you have made it to day 2 in my little time lapse. I did this painting over the course of 2 days. It's kind of like when you write a paper, you want to come back to it and look at it another day so you have a fresh set of eyes on it, and that also helps in painting, I have found. Now I am just going back in with my paintbrush and refining the edges of the mirror a little bit. I still think they're a little bit too sharp and they direct the viewer's eye a little bit too much towards these crisp edges, and I still want them to look blurry. I'm also still primarily using a dry brush for this rest of this painting. Um, Once the water kind of evaporated in the beginning, sometimes the wet brush makes the edges a little bit too crisp. But I do still use water to help me blend the paint colors a little bit and get the paint, if it's dried up, to a little bit more manageable state. Also notice that my palette is full of random colors, and I actually just kind of build up the dried paint on my palette instead of kind of cleaning it every time because it's a lot more efficient. And at the end, you can always use the leftover acrylic paint for other craft projects, which is really fun. And when it dries in one single layer, you can peel it off really easily, and then it doesn't contaminate the water with tiny little microplastics that acrylic paint is made out of. The scene kind of reminds me of like almost like we're on the moon and these grays are like little craters. And I think I do definitely want to do a space painting in the future and definitely more galaxies because I love creating kind of those same blurry kind of looks like with the fluffy clouds and the galaxies that are so far away, but they still need to have some sort of level of blurriness to them because they're not so close. So I'm definitely planning on doing some of those paintings, so stay tuned for those if you're interested. If any of you know me from Instagram, you know that I typically focus on digital artwork in Procreate, but I grew up doing acrylic paintings and I was only introduced to digital artwork in about 2020 when COVID happened and my class that taught graphic design, our teacher introduced us to Procreate as kind of like a digital way to still do assignments. Our school provided us with iPads that we had to turn back in before we graduated, but I learned a lot of digital art through that. But acrylic painting has still always been my first love. For I believe both digital and traditional art is still considered art. I think there's a lot to learn and respect about learning your program in digital art. Photoshop and Procreate can have a learning curve, just like traditional painting. And I feel like they're both considered art and they both require a lot of knowledge about what you're doing, and you can still learn and develop even though digital art can be more convenient because you're not exactly, bringing your paints everywhere and having all these materials, it's just a screen. There's still a lot that goes into digital art to learn and respect. So I love both of them and I still do both and I love them equally. So I don't like have one favorite or the other, but I think in this day and age, digital artwork is just a little bit becoming more popular because of apps like Procreate that make it accessible to everyone, which is really awesome. I'm using a 5x7 acrylic panel in this painting, but you can obviously upscale it if that's what you like. I found that when I paint small, my brain can kind of handle it better. I don't have to step back and look at my scene so much. Like you'll see in some of my Procreate tutorials that my screen is pretty big because it's a 12.9-inch iPad and I'm constantly like using my two fingers to zoom out and look at the whole painting from a further back perspective, which can really help narrow down if there's some things that maybe look out of place because you've been staring at it so close for so long. So right now I am focusing on those blurry reflections that are in the mirror. And I think in my reference photo, they're pretty much like some blurry cars in the background because I did take this on a road and you'll see that those kind of the dark area on the right is actually kind of a group of trees in my photo, even though it doesn't really look like that because it's so blurred and washed out. But I think adding the reflections to the mirror definitely adds a little bit of kind of like a story to it, I think. So I'm zooming in to show you a little bit more of the up close painting process on how I blurred this against my mirror to make it as smooth as possible. If you've listened this far and truly followed along to this painting, I just want to congratulate you for making it almost halfway. Um, I know this is a long video, but I'm hoping that you're enjoying it, even if you're not painting, and that it is a little bit relaxing to kind of watch the process. And I hope that one day you do try to paint a scene similar like this, or go out in the world and just take a picture of a place that you love and try to recreate it, because that's what I did here. What's great about painting is once you've learned the fundamentals, you can really the sky's the limit. And I'm really hoping to get out and do more paintings plein air or just out in the environment. instead of through online references. Sometimes you just have a better connection. They feel more personal to you when you're physically painting from the actual landscape. So that's something I'm trying to get more into. I'll be definitely documenting that process when I have the time to do it. And at the end of the day, my dream job would still be like living in a van and just painting all day. I think that would be so fun. But, right now it's college. It's okay. I'm focusing on art and I love, love, love teaching the behind the scenes of my process. And if you ever have any questions about the materials I use or just some techniques that I have, definitely drop a comment or send me a message on Instagram. I would be happy to answer them for you. Think this must be the fourth or fifth time I blended this area. It just goes to show you that I am sometimes a perfectionist and I will do what it takes to get a look that's desired, which can be sometimes frustrating and it can mean repeating it 4 or 5 times, but I think this way I do learn a lot from just the blending techniques and being able to carry that with me on my next painting and know the first time how to do it instead of maybe the third or fourth or fifth time. Main reason I'm choosing to work with acrylic paint is that it's a little slightly less toxic for cleanup wise, and being a college student and having no time, it is really easy to clean up instead of oil paints, which require solvents and all this stuff. I've done some research on it. I really want to try it one day, but sadly, not for a little bit. But I've developed a pretty good routine on my acrylic paint setup and cleanup, and you'll see that this mat that I have that has all these different sort of paint marks on it. I've used so many different times and I wash it when I can, but it's basically just a thick drop cloth that I lay on my desk and it just kind of it's so much faster than using a paper towel, for example, a lot less wasteful. And if I ever need to blend something, I can just even put some paint on the drop cloth and blend it on there if I want a different texture than the palette. So drop cloths are amazing for that. And although I don't have a very aesthetic background for painting, it works and it's very functional. That can be slightly challenging about painting with acrylic paints is because they dry so fast, and that's what make oils so blendable is that they take a long time to dry. But I think once you master the way that acrylic does dry and the layers you can build up on it, it's really not that bad. It's not too scary and you can get a similar effect. It's almost like if you were, for all my digital artists out there, just building up layers on Procreate, creating new layers and just kind of blending it that way instead of using a smudge tool. That's one nice thing about Procreate is I could probably do this whole landscape in almost 20 minutes. It is a lot more convenient, but it does take away from the kind of traditional aspect that I feel like I spend a lot more time on my traditional art, and sometimes it turns up a little bit better than my digital art in that way. That I do take the time to sit down and take the time to use the techniques I've learned and adjust. Where digital paint, it's so muscle memory to me, and I'm still more new at digital artwork than traditional painting, so I have a lot to learn there too. Thing that digital painting does offer though is you can still do one layer challenges, which was in my last video. I did a waterfall landscape in only one layer and actually with only one brush on Procreate, which was a little bit challenging because I like to use layers and I like to undo and redo. And I think that doing the one layer challenge kind of brings you back to the traditional standpoint where you physically really only have one layer. So it's a lot of fun to try to do those challenges in a digital world too. I have also gotten requests and just questions about how I sell my acrylic paintings on Etsy, and it's pretty difficult. As much as I love selling my art, sometimes the art market is just very competitive in general, and you have to kind of get your name out there. And even though I feel grateful for the amount of followers I have on Instagram, it's still hard, even with the amount of amazing people I have following me, to sell some paintings. So currently, it's not my job. I'm studying at a university to become a landscape architect right now, but art will always be I guess, my priority hobby outside of my classes. Like, right now, for example, I'm just in my apartment just recording this video after doing, all my landscape architecture homework, because that's my priority. I got the opportunity to come to university to study that. Sadly, I've been told growing up that art doesn't make you money, but I don't believe that's true. And I'm really trying hard to kind of prove to those people that told me that it is possible. And even trying to master something I do really want to learn, which is just landscapes and how I can make them more enjoyable for people and bring nature into cities, which I grew up in a suburb and I just longed for nature so badly. And when I went to national park trips, I just fell in love, and it's something that stuck with me. So that's why I tend to draw landscapes. And they're always just super relaxing. I enjoy looking at them. And a lot of my reference photos for my paintings come from my trips to national parks. Hoping to do a national park collection series, which would be really awesome. I've been to Yellowstone, Yosemite, North Cascades, Glacier National Park, Grand Canyon National Park, Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park. The list goes on, but my family and I took a lot of trips, and I would always take the opportunity to photograph them, even though a lot of the trips I didn't do professional photography until more recently, but I've finally been getting images that I really want to paint instead of taking ones that I found online, which I think it makes me a lot happier to have my own reference. Um, and I'm happy to start actually using my own references instead of searching for them. But there's still a lot of like beautiful websites out there, and companies that have like royalty-free images you can use to paint if you ever want to paint your own and are not able to access a camera with, or even a location because it's so far away. You can usually find it in the comfort of your own home and practice. But I always try to say go out and take your own photos because you learn a lot that way. You can also learn like, oh, the lighting at this time of day, I can reflect that during my painting. Sometimes I'll take multiple different pictures of my scene from different angles and try to show where the sun is, so later on I can be like, oh, the sun was hitting there. Maybe that'll help my brain better remember the ways of creating lighting when I paint. So now I am finally drawing the little heart that I drew with my fingers on the window when it fogged up. And I really tried to make it look like the window is separate from the mirror, like my drawing is not on the mirror, but it didn't really turn out that way in the end, which is just shows that I'm still learning, and none of my paintings are perfect. They're always works in progress. I feel like a painting is never done. Like, I can always add something to it. It's just getting to the point where I'm happy enough with it to call it good. Typically for dramatic changes like this, because I'm adding a really sharp white, I'll sketch it out just to make sure I feel more comfortable instead of just diving in right for it. Unlike the background, I had time to work with that, time to go over it. But now since I'm happy with the background and I don't want my background to change, I want to make sure whatever I add in the foreground, I'm very confident about. I'm going in with a round brush to create these sharp edges because I am finally done with all that blending that I did. So it is relaxing to kind of switch things up and really get the kind of main points into this piece. This photo that I took was kind of unusual in the fact that when I drew, it was actually lighter underneath than darker. Like when raindrops erase, sometimes you'll see a darker streak falling behind than a lighter streak, and it's all about how your camera is positioned and what your background is. So I think it's really cool that this heart came out this way, and I'm glad that it is the focal point. Even though my painting's not really following the rule of thirds, I do have my heart in the center that's kind of directing the viewer's eye to it. I'm sharpening the edges of the white using a darker gray to bring out the heart more. Congratulations, you have finally made it to the raindrops section. Took a while for us to get here, but we are finally here, and now we can focus on a little bit more of the fun side of making these raindrops unique and sharp and crisp and something to bring our eyes to. I'm starting by just creating a little crescent shape with the opposite end of kind of this round circle raindrop. So you'll see that I'm putting it in the upper leftish area of the raindrop circle because my dark in the scene is coming from the lower right. Raindrops are basically a reflection of what is seen in the scene behind them. You can do this same dark section for if you want to create streaks or longer raindrops, shorter raindrops. Raindrops come in so many different shapes, so I kind of try to do my best to reflect that from my reference photo. My favorites are definitely the the racing raindrops. So those are really easily created with just putting a little bit of slightly watery gray on your paintbrush and creating those streaks on the highlights of this mirror, for example. It's very bright here, so this streak will stand out more than if I tried to put it in the medium gray section where that upper raindrop is. And I just repeat this process by putting the darks in the farthest corner, the farthest arch of that raindrop away from the one in the background, and then I will go in with the highlights and put it on the kind of bottom or other side of the raindrop to give it this almost like a three-dimensional sphere. If you ever took art class when you were little, they might have taught you like lighting and spheres and how the sunlight hits the sphere and creates it, makes it look round. And if you ever had to draw those, those were always fun. But that's kind of what a raindrop is. Now I'm finally going in with the highlights, which is, I feel like, the highlight of a lot of artists' process because it kind of shows your understanding of where the light is hitting it, really starts to bring everything together. It's just kind of a final, like, thank you, this painting is finally coming along. May be kind of difficult to see, but I'm also experimenting with creating different lines inside the raindrop because since everything is flipped upside down, technically you could create like a whole upside down mirror with a little heart in the raindrop, although that would be very hard on this tiny scale. I think it would add a lot of detail, and that would be really cool to try in my future paintings. So I think I'm gonna take that little bit of knowledge that I know and incorporate it into a future raindrop painting. I hope at this point, if you've been following along, that your painting is up to your standards or looking similar to mine, or that you've at least just enjoyed learning, because at the end of the day, if you're not happy with your painting, you've definitely learned something by watching this or just experimenting on your own. And I hope that you can take away and kind of, eventually the goal is to create this from memory and not have to rely on a reference photo and just have 100% creative freedom, which is eventually my goal. That would be great. And that's what I kind of do on Procreate is most of mine are just from my head because my brain works quickly, and Procreate does help me work quickly, and it kind of lets me experiment, create my own world. So going back to both the fundamentals and your own experiments is really a good way to kind of balance yourself. I think balance is very important in art and in your life. I definitely need some balance in my college life right now. So I'm enjoying filming these videos. Here I am adding the final little highlights on our raindrops on the left side of our painting. And honestly, the raindrop part did not take nearly as long as the background, even though they're still both very important parts to bring our painting to life. My last step was to go over some parts of my painting with a very dry brush, both in white and dark, to kind of fog up some areas, blend the raindrops a little bit to show that there is still camera blur. It's not like crystal clear in my raindrops, and that the focus is still on this heart. And by doing that, you can kind of add a like vignette to the edges, which I also try to do. And last but not least, here is the final complete painting. I really hope you enjoyed this process, and signing the painting is always the most rewarding part, putting your little mark on your art. And thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in purchase this painting, it is available on Etsy right now for purchase. I truly hope you enjoyed, and if you have any recommendations or if you want to give some feedback, constructive criticism is appreciated. I would definitely love to know how I can improve my videos for the future. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.